There's just three real topics, three chapters in the book that I wanted to cover. Number one is financial transactions, employment, and then comes food and drink, and then family. And one thing I was thinking about when I was overseas in Morocco, it's interesting. You get to see different places. We stopped off at Istanbul for like a day, and then we went to Morocco. And my earliest memories are from a Muslim country in Pakistan. It's really interesting to go see a different place that has had Islam there for a long time, but it's very different. The people are different, their language is different, they dress differently, they talk differently. Morocco was really interesting. I have this feeling, at least with my own people, we're very picky about everything, So if you get cut off in a car or someone hits you by mistake, it becomes a whole commotion. But Morocco, everyone's so laid back. Alhamdulillah, it's very beautiful to be there because we were in the old city, which it's, I don't know if you've ever been to Morocco, but it's just these old cities, thousands of years old. The alleyways are not larger than just this little area here. And there's donkeys and motorcycles and all these people and tourists and everyone. And so I saw this one incident. I was walking with my son, and this man on a scooter hit this other person as they were leaving. And so he got hit pretty bad, and he kind of said something to him in an angry face. And they looked at each other, and they started laughing and smiling and hitting each other in the back, and then started talking, and they both left. And that's kind of how Morocco was. So it was really interesting to just see the friendliness of the people. And it was nice to show my kids that as well, because for them growing up here, it's interesting because everything is seen through the lens of a minority in a non-Muslim land. So when you're there, it's interesting for them to see, so everyone's Muslim here, just there's masjids everywhere. It's a very interesting experience, I think, having lived here so long now. But we can talk about some of that later. So let's go into the first topic here, and then please stop me anytime you have questions. I know we have a smaller class today, and same with the online folks. If you have any questions or you want to bring anything up, please do. So I have a slide on the chapter on financial transactions, and I added employment. I don't know if the book, it does talk about that, but I wanted to mention some things about it. So in all of these chapters, there's a general rule, which is always everything is permissible. I'm just good with food and drink, with all these different things that we're going to talk about. The general rules are that everything is permissible unless it's prohibited. And this gets back to this point that I mentioned earlier in one of the classes, that sometimes people go through life, especially if you're living in a city, where you have to ask whether something's permissible all the time. Can I stand here? Can I sit here? Can I park here? And that gets into the mindset where you're so controlled by the government, or everything is just, that's the way you think about things. And I think our religion sometimes becomes like that too. If you see someone's offering you some food, let's say it's not meat, but it's some food, a lot of people then become like, well, I'm not sure if I can have that. And that mindset is perhaps a bit errant when you consider everything's okay, unless you can think about a rule that says you can't have it. Unless there's a specific prohibition in the Quran or from the Prophet ﷺ, then everything's allowed. So when we're talking about financial transactions, employment, we're talking about everything. We're talking about working for somebody, working at a particular type of job, contracting with someone to do something, buying things, all of these things. The general rule in life will be, it's all good, everything's fine, unless there's something in the religion. And so the main prohibitions, and there's more, and again, a lot of these topics are very detailed. There's a lot of things we could talk about. I'm just going to try to cover from a very broad perspective, but if we have particular questions, we can address them. The first one is interest riba. I think most of us know this. So the word riba, it's sometimes translated as not interest, but like usury. And usury, USURY, in the English language, nowadays it's considered high interest rates, right? So I think on like some of these credit cards or some of these car loans that are kind of, for lower times, sometimes they charge like, I don't know, 15%, 10% interest. It can get very high. And so that's considered usury. But whether it was allowed for the different communities before Islam, like Isa al-Islam, like Jesus, or Musa al-Islam, Moses, there may have been some level of interest allowed. I don't know. I've heard both things. So riba may have been allowed in some form, but it would be the same case as alcohol. It became completely prohibited at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he outlawed any form of riba. And riba, at that basic means, it's in the past it was a like kind transaction. So I mean, the simplest thing would be if I lend you like 4 goats for like 3 months, and you have to give me back 4 goats plus like a baby goat. That's a like kind transaction. Obviously, we're dealing in currency. So what it becomes is the definition that I've seen is any, and this is from the book at page 173, you can see it. It's any stipulated additional amount over the principal in a transaction of loan or debt. And so that's kind of this definition where if you have debt, so you owe someone money and you have to pay something back in addition. And so even late fees can become riba. That is considered riba if you have constant late fees. And what happens is in the past, what riba really does, it has money accumulate amongst the rich and has the detrimental effect of making the poor poorer, because they get hooked on this and they have to keep paying interest and they never actually start paying the principal out. And that's what it's really damaging for especially the poor. From another book I got, interest-based transactions encourage the accumulation of debt and take advantage of people who are in difficult situations. And so, and obviously interest on loans. So we talked about interest on debt. Interest on loans is mortgage is a classical example. I will say there's a professor here in Houston. He used to be at Rice University. He used to give khutbah here too. And I've seen some people have this view that the mortgage isn't actually riba. I've heard this view. I'm just mentioning it because the way, so often these transactions in the West, it's the way they're structured will depend on whether it's riba. So the traditional thing that is riba is if I give you a loan of money and you have to pay back an additional amount, right? But so what I did, for example, when I buy bought my car, I say I need 0% APR, whatever the final price is. 0% APR. Just give me no interest at all. What is the final price you can give me? That price I'm going to pay over, 60 months, I think, usually like a car. That's not considered riba, even if the person who pays interest is getting it at a lower price. So let's just say your car is, let's just get an example, like let's just say you're buying a $20,000 car, right? And they're advertising it for $19,000 with 4% interest over 60 months. You're going to pay a small amount, but you're going to pay a certain interest every month. What you can say is, listen, I don't want to deal with interest at all. I value this car without the interest at $21,000. No interest, no nothing. I'm going to give it in installments, but I'm going to give you $21,000 total. That's considered okay. That's not considered riba.
So we can't even get something like, it's like, like I was thinking like we cannot do business like that, but we can even get something if it is on interest, but it's very hard.
Yeah, it's very
difficult.
difficult.
If you're going to get a house or something, they're going to be charging us so much interest rate and all that.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, there's various things that people do with houses. Like some people I know that are very, very careful about this stuff. They only rent. They never even try to invest in a house because they know that it's difficult. Other people, there's options. So a lot of Muslim loan organizations, I don't know their validity. We personally used like Guidance Residential. And I used it a long time ago because there was a stamp by Taqi Osmani, who I considered one of the great scholars. I don't know if it's still valid. A lot of these things, you're going to end up doing a lot of the same things, but they structure them a different way to try to make it halal. So I don't know anything about, as an economist or as someone who's as a financial person actually looking at the validity of it. But yeah, I mean, I don't have any money in savings accounts, nothing, just because it generates interest. And technically it's not allowed,
You can't even take it. Like,
can't even take it. There's no, I mean, I think the Prophet's hadith, I'm forgetting the exact words, but he said, even the person who witnesses it happening is part of the sin. It's a very serious thing, interest. And again, when you're talking about coming to a non-Muslim land and having to deal with the transactions here, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And I think you would have to consult someone that that a scholar that actually knows this stuff, to ask them what to do in those situations. I'll give you an example. There was a scholar, I don't know if it was Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, he was an Egyptian scholar, but the particular question had been, if I try to rent a house or buy a house without interest, I'm getting in a place that's very dangerous in the city. If I get a mortgage, I'm not trying to buy an extravagant house. I'm trying to buy something that's in a safe neighborhood, and the only way I can do it is with interest. What do you think? And in that situation, I remember one of the scholars, that scholar had said that if it's a matter of, you're in a non-Muslim land, you're trying as hard as you can, and your children might suffer, you shift for the safety, then go ahead and do it. Now, that's not a fatwa for everybody, but it's something to consider, that you have to ask I think your local scholar, and ask them your situation particularly, and see where we are. But I think in the West, it's or any non-Muslim country, and I don't even know, maybe it's in a Muslim country too, but it's very difficult. You have to pick and choose what you're doing. I mean, I think for example, just another example, when I went to law school, I actually got student loans. But the way that it was working back then is these Stafford loans, the federal government would delay the interest until 6 months after graduation. So I think on the 5 months and 11, whatever, 29 days, I paid off the full amount. So no interest was ever charged on that money that the government had given me. I gave back the exact amount they'd given me. So, you try to work it out, you try to do that, but it is very difficult. Yeah, so you have to consult a local scholar or alim and ask them like what's permissible, what's not. But it's a very serious thing.
Oh, brother, hi.
Yeah.
I used to hear something like that the interest.
Again?
Yeah. The explanation about the interest here, like in US, is that because you don't actually own the car yet, right? So just like when you don't own the car, you typically will rent it from, budget or Euro car. So on that process of owning the car, because you don't have the full ownership of the car yet. So maybe the interest is just kind of the word, but effectively it's kind of the cost for you to temporarily loan the car while you pay the installment until actually you finish. I used to hear some of this kind of logic from one of the scholar.
Yeah, that's so.
Yeah, the naming of the interest is becoming actually kind of rent.
Yeah, riba is not interest, right? So there's no, I mean, riba is not exactly interest, and there may be times where interest is charged. It's not the riba, but I think typically, same with the mortgage. I think the people that are trying to make allowances for this, they're saying that there's no loan that's taking place. No one's giving you money to buy the car. They're buying the car and they're letting you drive their car, for some time, and you're paying them a certain amount of rent maybe, and then they'll give it back to you. That to me is more like a lease, is a traditional rental. That's a lease. No one ever says lease is not allowed. But that transaction, I don't know enough about, whether that's riba or not, like how the scholars classify it, whether they classify it as a loan. Like financing is considered like a loan, right? They're giving you the money that you can buy it. But if you can go back and say like, no, it's not actually, I mean, that's the argument that was provided for the mortgage. They're not actually giving you a loan of money. They're buying the car. They're letting you enjoy it, right? If you can't make the payments, they'll take it back. And even that kind of thing matters. What they can do if you stop the payments, right? If you've paid for half the car, do you consider it a rental? You were just renting it for that amount of time. That's beyond my understanding of what to do. But that's what I'm saying. Like if you consult a scholar, I think there's a wide array of opinions on this and how it works. So even the financing a car with percent may not be riba, based on what you're saying, right? It may be something that's allowed by some scholar. But just look into it for your own particular, anytime interest comes up or late fees, that sort of thing, just ask a scholar and ask them what the exact situation is.
Okay, I'm Anthony Grigsby. I converted several weeks ago, and like you, I was traveling and I actually got sick. So, I haven't, been participating, but I have a question about debt. Now, I have debt. I have 100% pay time. I don't have any late fees. I've been consistent with that for a lot of years. But what about the debt that I already have? I mean, I'm trying to limit it and, trying to get into a situation where I'm debt free. How am I in that situation? Can you help me with that or explain that to me? Because this all happened before I converted.
If it happened beforehand, I think all you have to, I mean, the debt is still valid on you. You have to still pay back the debt. But if there's any agreements that you had entered into beforehand for interest, because you're in a non-Muslim land, none of that is going to affect you now, because you entered into those transactions beforehand. So, get debt free as soon as you can, however you have to, and any interest that's any riba that you have to be involved in for those transactions, inshallah, it won't be counted against you, because those were things that happened beforehand. And so you just have to get debt free, inshallah.
Okay.
Yeah. And any incidental riba is not going to be counted against you, inshallah.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thanks for that. And then you're traveling and you're sick, you don't have to fast either. So this is separate. I haven't fasted much of this month, this Ramadan. Any other questions on interest riba?
I do want to point out that I use UIF, so it's another Islamic loan. So there is available, and actually there's a council, Ijma Council, that actually rates all this banks, this UIF guidance. So there is options out there now, alhamdulillah. And I forgot the name of the council that rates this, la riba and all this stuff, because we did a very extensive research before we purchased our house too. So, but Allah.
Yeah, there's two things that are happening here. I think that there's one thing that when we talk about riba, I have a cousin in California who actually works for banks and that sort of thing, and he sent me this paper. It was a very well researched paper about how even the traditional Islamic loans are not good. And he wasn't talking about Islamically, really. He was talking about from an injustice standpoint. He's talking about how even these insurance companies, you've been paying money on your insurance company, you have to fight with them to get your money back. I mean, this is what you've been paying for, right? I mean, it happens all the time. Riba, really, you have to look at it from the lens broadly as something that's very unjust against people. It really causes problems in society. It's really something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's worrying about people getting stuck into really oppressive dealings, because riba is an instrument of the wealthy to do that to people. That's what's coming from the broad perspective. And then we have this other place where, what do I do personally? I want to buy a car. I want to buy this. I want to buy that, right? And in that situation, we're looking at it from a different lens. It's like now the prohibitions are stopping you from getting somewhere, right? So we have to keep in mind that the rule is there to stop injustice, to stop all these things from taking place. When we're in a land where it's rampant, riba is rampant, the entire economy is literally based on just lowering and raising the interest rates on banks, right? That's how the economy is fixed. We're part of the system. So the way that we are looking at riba is going to be different. But we just have to keep in mind the other part of it is that God is really trying to legislate something that's a very oppressive thing. And so this paper my cousin had written, it was really interesting because it was like an insider's view, someone who's been at a bank saying things that, like these late fees, he was like, why can't they just waive them? You know, you've been paying all your payments, you miss one payment and suddenly there's a late fee. And so he was talking about these things where he's like, even the amount of profit, he did a study on it and was saying, you'd still be very profitable, even if you got rid of like, you know, these 10 practices that are really bad, but those 10 practices make you even more profitable. So I think that's what's to keep in mind about riba is, alhamdulillah, if we have the money, we're doing okay. These transactions will be okay. It's really for the large amount of people who are paying credit card debt and all these kind of things. It's becomes very difficult for them.
I was just gonna say, you know, to me, like the payday loan places, absolutely.
But if you can get a 0% interest loan,
And you're still exposed.
maybe, you know, I'll never do this in a worse situation, right? So maybe this is just a means for us to consider what debt are you actually taking on? Even a 0% interest loan can be more than you can absorb, you know, on a monthly repayment basis. So, you know, I've always kind of looked at, you know, I have a small house mortgage and things like that I'm paying off, and now I'm thinking maybe I should try to alleviate it as quickly as possible. But the percent rate is very small. It's not, especially by today's terms.
Yeah,
it's
inflation, yeah.
it's very much under market. So does that mean it's still riba if it's, you know, under the prevailing rates? Or
There's a whole discussion about that. I think one of the questions I'd seen was, what if the interest rate I'm paying on my house is less than the inflation rate? I'm actually making money on the house. So you get into these types of questions. I mean, you know, again, I'm going to say Allahu Alam, this is beyond my pay grade to try to understand a lot of these technical economic issues. But I think you raise an important point about this also allows us to see like how we spend. You know, this is a consumer society, right? I mean, even when I came in 2000 from Canada here, there's a couple of things that shocked me about, I think maybe it's Texas or all the United States, but one of the things that shocked me, I remember thinking the number of signs on the roads. I'd never seen that before, just going down US 59, I guess 69 now. The other thing was just the amount of shops. You have all the residential area and you'd have a small area of like a shopping mall, and that's it, small shopping center. Here it was just, I could not believe the amount of stores there were. It was just mind-boggling. I was like, how do people shop like so? I just couldn't understand it. It was a cultural shift. I think these kind of topics also allow us to see how are we spending, right? What do we spend on? You know, do we get things that we need, and the rest we give to charity, or, you know, are we going well beyond? This isn't a class where, you know, you have to live like an ascetic on a mountain, right? I'm not talking about that, but it really does. I think the Surah Al-Isra, it's also called Bani Israel. Allah Ta'ala does talk about like extravagant spending on things you don't need, right? So really a lot of times people will get into debt to buy things that they don't really need 100%. And they get into these debts, and then this is how the cycle starts. Right. And so, I mean, the subprime crash that happened back in 2008 or whenever it was, you know, a lot of there were, you know, we hear the term predatory loan practices and that sort of thing, but people were buying these homes that were way beyond what they could afford. And these banks, just to make money, were just getting rid of this stuff. Right. And then, it's common, I think, for people to have $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 debt on their credit cards even. My father, just when we were growing up, I mean, I don't think he's ever paid a late fee on his credit cards, like ever. It just never happened. And so I wasn't even used to this concept where people just pay the minimum amount and then the rest goes on interest, right? But that's kind of how the whole society is pushing you to do that. Like, hey, you can buy this awesome thing right now. You don't have to pay it way later. So I think that kind of allows us to be a little bit more cognizant of our money, how much we have, what we're paying for. So yeah, I was thinking about that with your comment. Let's move on, and we can bring up any of the topics at the end of the class. I put gambling here. I think that's kind of known. I think you're not allowed to gamble. One of the things that the book talks about is that lottery is also gambling. And whenever I hear about lotteries, I think about my ninth grade professor for economics in Montreal used to call it a fool tax. That's the word he used for it. But yeah, lotteries, that sort of thing. And there's an element of chance, you can lose your money. That's not allowed as well. This last bullet that I have, fairness, honesty, and business dealings. Some of the things that I brought up here: coercion, dishonesty, bribery. You have to remember that there's a right to make, you can make a profit. That's a good thing. And most of the Muslim world was based on trade, right? The spice route, if you read about that, I mean, it was the Muslims were very involved in trade. So trade is a good thing. What we start talking about here, even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, before the revelation, he used to trade in Syria. And there's a story, now I don't know how, some business people might laugh and say like, well, this is not relevant anymore. But at the time, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was selling something and someone said, I want it for this much. And he said, that's too low. It's worth far more. And the example I thought was, and I really think about this example was, if you go to a garage sale, right? And you're like an antiques shop person, you know antiques, and you see something and it's worth $3,000 and they're selling it for like $10. What do you do at that point? Right? Because I don't think it's honest to buy it for $10 because the person doesn't know its worth. So I was thinking about the different scenarios that I would do, maybe, right? Maybe you buy it for $10. All right. You sell it for $3,000 and you send that person $2,000 in the mail, like, hey, or or you tell them like, this is far more valuable. I could get a higher price. I'll give you $2,000 for it. And then I can make a profit as well. Those are the types of things that we're talking about. Like, I think it's a kind of a real world example where you could buy it for $10, but then you could, but you're taking advantage of the person. And so that's the sort of thing that we have to think about, that you make some money here, but there's sin coming your way, right? Or there's something from God that he may not be happy. So we always have to be cognizant about that. Yeah.
By doing all this is really good. And I think like in the ancient times, I'm not saying that this is wrong or something. How can you survive in this world with these values?
So,
It's so hard.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not a business owner, right? I don't have,
I'm just-
I'm saying I work for a living. Like I get money, a salary. So I don't want to talk down to like business people and say like, it's easy to say you need to have ethical business practices. It's a different thing when you're actually dealing with it. There are clear lines, for example, like not paying your employees. That's something that's very serious. That's very dangerous. Like the Prophet ﷺ, he said that give the worker his wages before his sweat dries. That's a statement he had, right? And I know this happens amongst Muslim business people. I've heard stories where, or they enter into contracts with employees that are very onerous on the employee. They're very unfair on the employee, right? Now, there's murky things maybe that I don't know any specifics that I can talk about that maybe that I may see as unethical, but like they are now standard practices. Allahu Alam. I'm saying you have to behave ethically. There are guidelines or guideposts, but when you get into a particular thing, if you're going to make money based on dishonesty, coercion, fraud, those sorts of things, that's just not allowed. Now, the question then becomes, well, how would you survive? Well, Alan, maybe you don't. I mean, I mean, I don't know like how exactly that works, but that's something that I think, again, you probably have to go to a scholar and ask them a particular question on like, well, you know, is this allowed?
I think dishonesty can be more attributed to the selling than the buying. So if I'm selling an article and I say, man, this pen right here was used to sign the Magna Carta. And you know, it's worth $12,000. And if I can convince you to part with $12,000, well, that is absolutely dishonest. However, if somebody is selling a pen for, you know, $50 and I come upon it and through my knowledge and my sweat and my work, I know that that pen was used to sign the Magna Carta. He doesn't know that, but he just didn't do his due diligence on his own goods. But I have, and I come and I say, I tell you what, I'll give you $50 for that pen, or I'll give you $45 for that pen. We are in an open and equal exchange. And there's no dishonesty on my part by not sharing what I know. You know, I haven't coerced him to do it. I haven't entered into any fraudulent statement. So that's kind of where I struggle a little bit on believing that, you know, maybe Allah is granted me that knowledge and he's granted me that situation so that he can pass blessings to me so that I can do my zakat or I can do this or this or this.
Yeah, and again, we have guideposts about, you know, coercion, dishonesty, fraud, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you have the knowledge, you're going around, you know, if you're purchasing real estate, for example, right? The person hasn't done their due diligence on, and they want to buy a tract of land maybe that you don't think is valuable, or maybe you know, or you know, you've done a huge study and you think this land will be very profitable in 10 years, just where the way the freeway will go or whatever it is. That person hasn't done it, they want to sell it to you. That seems fair. But you know, if you're a real estate person and you're selling people homes in the floodplain, right? Now, you know that they don't have the capacity or they don't have that knowledge, right? They're not, but again, it changes it. What if they're a huge corporation that should have done its due diligence, right? Allahu Alam, see at that point, and even in the legal, Western legal world, it does make a difference because oftentimes when it's a company dealing with a company, it's a completely different analysis than if it's a company dealing with a person, right? Because they say that person does not have the sophistication that you guys have with your attorneys and your real estate folks, and you're selling to this person who they don't know any of that. They don't have access to that. So I think
As a
that's
seller, I agree 100% with what you're saying as a seller, but as a buyer, you know, and he's selling, I can sell, or I can buy it, his face value. I don't have to share my knowledge with him as the seller. I mean, that's potentially speculative as well. If he's selling a tract of land that I think a road might go through, well, that's highly speculative, right? You know, so I think as a buyer, the honesty is in my presentation of myself, my capability to pay, you know, all of those sorts of.
well. So the example I'm thinking about, I'm not disagreeing. I just don't know. What was that movie with the book is called Oil, but it's the Oil for Blood or something. There Will Be Blood. I think, yeah, that's the one with Daniel Day-Lewis. So one of the big parts of the movie is that he's trying to purchase this land that he wants to get his oil pipeline to go right through. Or I think the land also has oil, but you know, but he goes to the family and talks them up, and you know, like he's being real nice. He's like, well, and they give him a price, and he's like, you're good people. I'm going to give you more money than you deserve. And then one of the kids in the house, he's like, I know there's oil under this house. I know it's worth far more than what you're saying. You know, now what he's doing is he's trying to take advantage of these simple farm folk. Is it legal Islamically? Maybe, I don't know. Allahu Alam. Is it sinful? Possibly, even though it's legal. I don't know. I mean, we're getting into murky areas where I'm not sure exactly what the answer is. But there, in that movie, they clearly, it's a fiction, obviously, right? But they clearly are trying to create a situation where you're thinking that's unfair what he's doing. Because he's taking advantage of their ignorance and trying to buy their land for cheap.
Well, and he had, again, that was an entity, he was a company at that
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
And he had resources, these people didn't.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying is two big corporations going with each other. A simple person trying to buy something from a corporation trying to buy something from a simple person. It changes the entire analysis of how we're approaching the issue of what's unfair and what's not.
I think that can turn to coercion very quickly.
Yeah. So I'm going to leave it at that as far as like, I don't know any specifics. There are guide markers, there are things, and then there's what's better. There's what's worse. There's what's legal. There's what's not legal. I mean, whether you'd be dragged in front of a qadi in Muslim land because you did something unfair, who knows? Allahu Alam. I don't know what that would be particularly. I mean, for example, the subprime thing, and I'm talking about that because I was taking banking law at the time and I did a project on subprime loans. But, you know, the people's defense was like, we didn't hide anything. They had the 20-page contract in front of them, right? Because the reason it was so difficult, they had these adjustable rate mortgages, right? These ARMs, what they call them. So they gave you a price of, you only have to pay $1,000 per month for this massive house over 30 years. And then there's what they call a balloon payment. After 2 years, it would jump to $3,500. But people weren't told that, right? Now, their defense would be, it was in the contract. I didn't have to volunteer that information, right? Now, the government got mad at that later when everything blew up, right? The economy collapsed because of so many of these sales. But whether in the Muslim world, like how much disclosure you would have to give to that person, or is it on the person? Like, hey, you want to buy this massive house? Shouldn't you have had questions on how you can afford such a huge house for $1,000 a month?
Yeah.
Allah, I tend to side with, you have to be very upfront and explain to people exactly what's happening, but whether that's legally required, Allah, I don't know. Just the picture is a painting of the bazaar at Athens. It's interesting.
I do have one question in the.
Yeah, let's go to the question. Lottery for green card count. No, I think it's a different type of lottery. My understanding of the lottery for the green card is you put your name in and I mean, you may have an application fee or something, but what you're trying to get in return is not money. You're trying to get in return the possibility of entering the United States. I think the word lottery is there, but I don't think it has anything to do with the lottery for money, which is what we were talking about. So I think that's perfectly permissible as far as I know. Anything else? And just one last thing on this fairness, honesty, and business dealings. This is purely a personal story that I remembered. My sheikh, his father-in-law used to have a gold shop in Turkey, right? He had a little gold shop in the old city and he would sell his gold. He said he wasn't very profitable. It was just enough to keep the family like surviving. And he had a son who was always like railing against him that he was too nice. And because what he would do is people would come to buy gold and they would find something in there and they were asking the price and he'd tell them. And what he would do often is say like, you get it better somewhere else down the street. He would actually tell people to go to his competitors because they were selling that thing for cheaper. And so the son would get upset at that always, like, you're causing us we could be so much more profitable. And he said he would always do this sort of thing. He was just a very soft-hearted man. And he said when he passed away, his son took over, totally different practices, right? Trying to make more money. And he said he was very profitable for 3 months and then the whole thing collapsed. That is to say, there is barakah. There is blessings you get from God that are unseen, that we don't, we don't think about. And those are often the things like, I know in my family, it's this concept that it's the prayers of the elderly that are keeping you going. All this money, all these families that are surviving are because a few old people are making dua for you. and God loves them, and he's providing all this barakah, all this benefit. And that's sort of the way I think a lot of in the old world people thought about, which I think is a good thing to think about too. There's no barakah and bad money. And overseas also, one of the honesty, fairness, and dealings is bribery is a big thing in the old world, in the old countries, you know, unfortunately, I don't know whether it's an outcrop of colonialism, whatever it is, but, you know, giving bribes to low-level people, high-level people, that's a very serious sin. Also, let's go to the next slide.
And taking it, I imagine, is also.
And taking it's probably far worse. Yeah, because the people are probably giving it are often at the mercy of the system, right? They're often thinking, at least the way I understand in Pakistan is like, if you're trying to bid for something, it's almost like you have to give a bribe, and who gives the bigger bribe gets the thing. So they're almost at the behest of like just the way society is functioning, right? They have to do it. It becomes almost like a tax. People taking it are the ones that are causing it to happen, right? And it's often just a circumstance of poorer countries, poor, you know, corruption, that sort of thing. When you get more powerful nations, I mean, just economically, people talk about this. When a country is more powerful, more sustainable, the people at the top don't want their money going to low-level people. They want all the money coming back to them. Like,
That's right.
America wants to be paid its taxes. Uncle Sam wants its taxes. It doesn't want some lower-level people eating up that money that's coming for them. So this happens a lot in poorer nations. It's very common, the corruption. Food and drink. The general rule, like what we did before, is all food and drink is permissible, unless there's something more specifically prohibited. And there are more prohibitions than what we talked about in the other in financial transactions. But generally, again, we're talking about this concept of when we approach things, they're halal, unless there's something particular. So let's just go down. And just in Surah Al-Baqarah, I'll give you these two ayahs, 2:172 and 2:173. So 2:172, Allah Ta'ala, the translation is, "O you who believe, eat of the good things we have provided you and be grateful to God, if it is indeed He whom you worship." And the next verse says, "He has only forbidden you carrion, blood," so carrion is like dead meat, blood, swine, and that over which other than God has been invoked. But there is no sin or blame on those who are compelled by necessity without transgressing or going too far, for God is forgiving, all merciful. That's 2:173. Again, most foods are considered permissible or halal to eat, such as fruits, vegetables, grains, fish, and dairy products. So the first prohibition we come to is intoxicants, right? Alcohol, drugs, and I put alcohol here, but obviously alcohol can be of different types. So we're talking about when alcohol is used to cause you to be intoxicated. Any sort of drug that causes you to be intoxicated, that's completely forbidden. So substances like alcohol and other intoxicants are prohibited since they cause their users to lose their mental faculties and self-control, bringing about many individual and societal ills. The next is certain meat is prohibited. Pigs, anything to do with pigs, pork, bacon, any of that stuff is completely forbidden. Even, you know, again, this comes up with young kids now, like gelatin, you know, if it has like possibly pork products, that sort of thing. My kids they get these gummy bears, Haribo gummy bears, and you have to look if they're made in Turkey or Germany in the back. So like my kids will always run and like look for like Turkey or Germany. Because apparently the German one's not, and the Turkish one is halal. So that can also come about. Predators, any dogs, cats, any other predators, birds of prey even, that's in the book. Some, and I don't know if there's a difference of opinion, but some look at even like tusks, like the elephant is a good example. They only eat vegetable. I mean, they're herbivores, right? They don't eat meat. But because of their tusks, some scholars would classify them as like aggressive and say they're prohibited. Allahu alam. I don't know if we're eating elephant meat, so it may not be an issue. Insects are generally considered disallowed. The Prophet ﷺ made an exception for locusts. which you could eat in the past. I mean, again, I don't know if we're getting locusts here, if it's relevant here. And again, from the ayah, from the verse, all of these things are permissible if you're starving or if you're in a serious issue. Again, if you're in a desert island, maybe there's only pigs on the island, and you can't fish, or there's nothing else that's there. If you have to eat it, you can eat it. It's not an issue at all. It becomes halal for you at that point. Now, lawful meat, seafood is generally considered halal. I know the Shafi school is like very lenient. The Hanafis, if you go back in the older Hanafi fiqh rulings, they have issues with like certain types of sea creatures because they liken them to like certain land animals. But generally, I think seafood is generally allowed. Now, lawful meat, other than seafood, land animals, they must be slaughtered correctly. All right. Now, one thing I'm going to bring up here that is relevant to us is this concept of zabiha versus halal. Now, in Pakistan, a lot of immigrants that come from Pakistan or Turkey, a lot of the non-Muslim lands, when they say halal, when they ask if something is halal to like a restaurant room, they're asking if it's zabiha. Zabiha has come to mean the traditional ritual slaughter that a Muslim does. And that's akin, the same as kosher. So those paying people will eat kosher because kosher is done through ritual slaughter. So that's what zabiha has come to mean. So when people from these places are saying, is this halal? That's what they're asking. And often the response they will get like, well, of course it's halal, it's chicken, you know? And what the person means, like it's from Walmart, but it's chicken, it's halal, you know, it's like, but that's not what so there was a disconnect when I saw earlier on is that when people were saying halal, they actually meant, is it been slaughtered ritually by a Muslim or someone from Ahl al-Kitab? Now the Jews have that still, right? They have kosher. They have rabbis that go different places and stamp it and say this is kosher. I don't know that Christians do that. Now the example I was giving, well, so let me give the book at 191 says that if the people of the book, if the manner of the slaughter is not known and is done by people of the book, it's halal. That's what the book says. And it says that that's the predominant view, which I'm not sure it is, but that's the view that I give. That's the more lenient opinion. So under that view, McDonald's, burgers, all that stuff is totally okay because we're in a land of the Ahl Kitab, the Christians, and we don't ask the manner in which it's been slaughtered, we just eat it. That's the more lenient view. The view that I follow, again, doesn't matter that I follow it. I'm just saying the different view is that it has to be ritually slaughtered. That's what it means to come from people of the book, because in the past they slaughtered it ritually. So if the Jew does it, or for example, if I go to a farm and there's a Christian family and they slaughter it with the jugular being cut, it doesn't matter what they say, it doesn't matter what they do, that animal is halal under any opinion. Now, what if they do it the way that it's done in a lot of the slaughterhouses where they shoot it in the head and they don't cut the jugular? That's the problem. For me, the problem becomes if you're saying that if a Christian does it or a Jew does it, you don't ask how it is and you eat it. If a Muslim did it that way, it would not be halal because it's considered carrion. It's considered that the animal died and its jugular wasn't cut, right? So there's a difference of opinion on this, suffice it to say that. For me, especially in Houston, it's not difficult to get halal food. I'm from a Muslim family also, you know, we know the places and this and that. If it's difficult for you, I know there's Muslims even in Houston, it may be difficult for them to access halal food. Maybe take the more lenient opinion. But the scholar, Sheikh Sayyid, I think it's Sinat. Well, I was talking to a different scholar at one of the masjids, and he was very much against eating food from outside. You know, he said it has to be halal or it has to be kosher. He's like, I only get my food from Middle East halal, right? That's where he used to go. And then I asked him about the other sheikh because they're friends. And I said, well, what about the other sheikh? What does he do? He says he cuts it himself. He doesn't even trust the Muslim slaughterhouses.
If you go hunting?
Hunting's a separate thing. Yeah, hunting is a separate thing. We're just talking about a farm animal and you're cutting it. You know, hunting has its own rules. There's a whole chapter, in this chapter, there's all these views on how you have to do it if you're hunting. I didn't get into that here, but there's rules, specific rules on if you're hunting on how to kill the animal and how to slaughter it. But that same scholar who cuts it himself, he's very lenient. If someone comes to him and he says like, all of this meat here is okay as long as it's, you know, because we're in a Christian land, it's all good. So I think it is a matter of just looking at what you think is more safe and what you think is more valid. But those are the rules on ritual slaughter. Any questions on any of that?
There is a question online.
So this is a very good question. The question is, how about wine that people put when they're cooking? I believe it does not make a person drunk or intoxicated, right? So that's a really good question. What if a drop of wine, so wine in large amounts will cause you to be intoxicated, right? And it's not like it, yeah, so let's just stop there. Yeah, so if you drink wine in larger amounts, it can get you intoxicated. Now, what if a drop is put into water and you drink the water? Is that halal or is that not?
Would be halal.
Because you can't get intoxicated, right? The rule is if it makes you intoxicated in large amounts, it's prohibited in small amounts. Okay,
Does that also apply to like homeopathic medicine? They have to use it for some herbs.
so that depends if that alcohol would cause you to get intoxicated, like that particular alcohol they're putting in. If you increase it in certain amounts, will it cause you to get intoxicated? Oftentimes, there's certain types of alcohol that would just kill you, right? It wouldn't even get you intoxicated. Those may not apply. Like my wife loves, maybe I shouldn't test this to everyone, but she loves kombucha. Kombucha has some alcohol in it. It has a very small trace amounts of alcohol, but that's the same amount of alcohol that you might get if you let bananas ferment. Like bananas start fermenting very quickly. And so your kids are eating older bananas. There's alcohol in there. Now, can that alcohol get you intoxicated? If you ate like 100 bananas that were old, no, it never happened. With kombucha, it's the same thing. If you drank that kombucha, 100 bottles, could you get intoxicated? The answer is no. So we're talking about in its pure form, if it would get you intoxicated in large amounts, then it becomes completely disallowed. So even cooking with it, right? Now, what I've heard is, well, it's all burned away anyways. I don't know. Allahu alam about that. I don't know if that's a legitimate excuse, but generally, even adding wine is not considered okay. So we go to restaurants. My wife is very big on asking, like especially some of the seafood stuff that we get, maybe cooked in alcohol. And they'll tell you that, right? And so you can ask them to take the alcohol out, or sometimes they say, yeah, well, no, we cook it with alcohol. We can't do anything about it. We usually get something else. Well, we always get something else, but that's something that you'd have to ask a scholar about, particularly whether that cooking with it, if it's all burned away, if that's allowed or not. And what is this photo? My brother put this photo. These are Hui Muslims. I think it's in mid-central China, in the Ningxia province. This is just a photo of them. Their restaurants are stereotyped for their immaculate cleanliness, a product of a religious commitment to hygiene and an avoidance of certain vices like cigarettes, alcohol, and gambling. Interesting. Let's go to the next slide. Oh yeah, on this slide, I just wanted to go through a typical, so there's an entire book on Imam al-Ghazali. I've mentioned him a couple of times. I mean, he lived like 1,000 years ago, but he had this Ihya Ulumuddin. It's the revival of the religious sciences. He has an entire book that's been translated into English on the manners and etiquette of eating. I read that a long time ago. It was really good. But typically, just wanted to kind of go through this because I go through this with my kids so much. I thought it was nice to just the sunnah practices when eating. Wash your hands thoroughly, both of them. And even someone had told me that the Muslims typically used to not dry their hands completely, or at least keep the top wet, so that the host or someone, if you're eating with, they can see that you washed your hands. You begin with God's name, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You sit and eat with the right hand. Sitting is a big thing, even for drinking. There is this idea that when we're eating, we're eating. We're not running around doing other things. So we sit, we eat with our right hand. And even with the right hand, there are more particulars. Like you don't eat with all 5 fingers, you eat with 3 fingers. And Imam Ghazali, I think in that book, had something like, I forgot what he would say. He would say something like, 5 is like an animal, 4 is like an ignorant person, 3 is prophetic, 2 is kingly, and 1 is arrogant. He had this thing. I thought it was really interesting. But I think generally the Muslims try to eat with 3 hands, and the left hand isn't generally eaten. But again, there's no sin in eating with more than 3 fingers or anything like that. End by praising God, saying Alhamdulillah, praise Allah. Take care not to criticize certain foods, even if disliked. This is in the book. It's very important. I get on this with my kids, I hate this, or this is the worst thing ever. I was like, don't ever say anything bad about food. If you don't like it, just put it aside. Don't eat it, don't insult food. Avoid excess eating. Excessive eating. So there's a hadith, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, no man fills a vessel worse than his stomach. A few mouthfuls would suffice to give him the strength he needs, but if he must eat more, then he should fill 1/3 of his stomach with food, 1/3 with drink, and leave 1/3 empty for easy breathing. So that's a hadith from Rasulullah ﷺ. And this is a family in Kano, Nigeria. And this is just before iftar, they're about to eat. And there's some things in the book about eating from a single dish. I don't think that's really commonplace anymore. I've only seen it at the Almeida Masjid in Southeast Houston. They have these huge dishes for iftar, and you just eat from the same plate. And so they have etiquettes for that. You eat from your area. And there's a lot more etiquettes on eating. A scholar came to my house. He's a convert scholar. He spent a lot of years traveling all over the Muslim world, but he was eating at my house, and he'd constantly just have his mouth up here, and he wouldn't even show me. He ate so carefully. I was just like embarrassed. Like, he was eating so nicely at my house. He had a lot of manners. So there's a lot of things to learn about that. Let's go to the next slide. Chapter that the book covers next is dress and clothing. Again, general rule. It's a pattern here that everything is permissible unless there's something specifically prohibited. What are those? Well, so let's just talk about the general rule. So one thing is that it should be clean, right? That's sort of, it's not exactly about clothing, the type of clothing, but your clothing needs to be clean, needs to be, you need to be well groomed. And there is also, so one of the books that I was reading said, there's no specific article of clothing prescribed as Islamic clothing that must be worn. No set of clothes are considered more Islamic than others, since there's a great range and diversity of accepted styles from country to country and culture to culture. There are hadith which talk about, beautifying yourself. And I'm not talking about, it's just the clothes you wear should not be tattered. They should not give an impression that, you can't afford like decent clothes. So Muslims dress nice, or you should. The main thing about the clothing is that it covers what's considered the awra. Right, awra is the private areas of a Muslim. So again, we've gone over this before, but for men it's navel to the knees, and for women it's everything except the hands and face. All right, and some may make an allowance for the feet as well. But as long as those things are covered, then there is no, and also like tight-fitting clothing that would show the awra is also considered not allowed. So what's prohibited? Gold or silk for men. So gold embroidery, like actual gold. Men can't wear silk. So tight-fitting clothing we mentioned just now. And there's this concept of extravagant clothing. Something that's trying to draw attention that's, I don't even know a good example of this, but it's something, often in Muslim rulings, you'll have this thing called urf, URF, urf. It's like the custom of a society. So something is considered extravagant in a society that may become prohibited. But like, I always found it interesting. And if you go to like sub-Saharan Africa, even the men are dressed in such colorful clothing. And maybe it's the same in Indonesia as well, but like they have like these very striking blues and reds. You would never see that in Pakistan. You know, it's a different thing. I mean, the kufis are often colored and stuff, but the clothing is usually very, you know, a single color, that sort of thing. So extravagant, anything that's pride or conceit. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, dragging your clothes on the ground was considered very, like the rich would do it. So he prohibited that. I don't know if there would be something similar in our society that's considered showing off. You know, maybe some brand names might do that. You know, if it's something that you're trying to show this air of like, I'm very rich, or, you know, I'm an important person, that stuff would be disallowed as well. And I mentioned this, but the cultural practices, you know, what is Islamic clothing? The interesting thing about Islamic civilizations, wherever they've been, right? I mean, the brothers, they got me that nice Indonesian shirt, right? I mean, it's an Indonesian shirt. You can tell by looking at it, right? I always used to love seeing the Indonesians, Malaysians, especially at Eid when we have it at the Reliance Stadium. It's always amazing when you see the Malaysian Indonesians come and they have their particular headdresses, they have their particular things, and you have the Nigerians come, and it's amazing to see because it's not all the same. You don't have everyone dressed the same. You know, you can tell the Afghani clothing, you can tell Turks, you can tell all these different people. The Arabs have, you know, each place has its own thing. Even when I went to Morocco, you know, I had to buy that Jedi looking thing. Have you seen that? It literally, George Lucas got it from that area. You know, it's the pointy hooded thing. It's you see that all over in Morocco. People are just walking around the street at night wearing that thing. So I got one for myself. I was like, this is awesome. And they have their own little kufi with the pom-pom on it. You know, like they have that thing. It's very Moroccan. It's very North African. That's what they wear. You know, we have this thing in India, Pakistan called the sherwani. And it's this long thing and you wear it. So that's a very beautiful thing. I think Muslims, anywhere Islam entered, it kept the culture. It changed it slightly, you know, if there were dresses that, or things that are not allowed that wouldn't cover the awrah, for example, that would change. But you can often just look at a masjid or the clothing and you can tell where the people are from, right? And that is Islamic clothing. So I think, you know, is there an American Islamic clothing? Like, is there a culturally American thing? I don't know. I mean, will it develop in the future? Or jeans, you know, because often, honestly, what I started wearing outside, I wear this kufi, I wear the, you know, the kurta that the Pakistanis have, and I wear jeans. Because jeans have pockets and stuff that I need, you know, or, you know, like I need that stuff. I need my wallet, all that stuff. I need my belt. But then that thing covers up more than like a normal shirt does. So is that going to develop into some particular American, maybe like a cowboy hat? Allahu Alam. That's what's kind of cool about Islam. So I think often what I've seen with converts, you know, especially this was maybe more true in the 90s, they would almost have to adopt a culture, right? Like Cat Stevens, like Yusuf Islam in the Britain was talking about, he sort of adopted this North Indian culture because that's what was there. And it took him years to kind of get out of that and just like, you know, I'm a British guy, I'm from here, this is my world. Let's try to develop something of my own. So, and it's actually kind of interesting. You know, if you look at the beard has made like a comeback, right? In the last like 10 years, maybe a decade, like a beard became a big thing. So you'd have these fashion models, these men have like fist-length beards. It actually came from Philadelphia. It started being called the Sunni beard, right? And because there were Black Muslims in Philadelphia who were talking about having a Sunnah beard, a fist-length beard. And it became a fashion thing that came out of Philadelphia, and it went everywhere. So it's really interesting that it would have started off as just like these Muslims in Philly saying we want to have a Sunnah beard, went all over the world as like a fashion symbol. Right? Made it easier for me to have a beard at work then, right? These are young Kosovo Muslims taking part in a prayer during celebration of Eid al-Fitr in Sultan Mehmed Fatih Mosque in Pristina, in Kosovo. Any questions on dress or clothing?
I have one question, like covering the head. We should, like, I know we should cover all the time, but like, it is like when we're praying in the masjid, then we have to cover the head. What about hair? We can be like this, or it should be properly covered, or?
When you're praying, it has to be completely covered. I mean, not even a single hair can be shown. So like, yeah, be very careful in prayer, especially to cover up the entire head.
Even in the house when I'm.
Even in the house. Yeah, even when you're alone in the house. Yeah, it has to be covered up completely. Yeah, like I can't see any hairs at all. So when you're praying, especially, everything should be covered up.
Otherwise, like in the masjid, and we're like, this is okay.
Everything should be covered up. I mean, technically the full hijab is, I mean, what you have on is very typical in Pakistan, right? Like even in the news and stuff,
Like,
they have this thing, but I mean, the actual correct, proper way is to completely cover the hair altogether. Yeah, from women, yeah. And even, I mean, I don't know about the ears, I've seen different things, but this area here is very important too. Like, so the hijab actually comes down and covers, like, that's why the thing comes up. I mean, and if you're like, you're coming from like India, Pakistan area, that because that land was ruled by Muslims for so long, a lot of the dupatta and all that stuff, they are Muslim things that kind of crept into the entire culture. So a lot of times, like, that's just already there.
Because I've never covered my head before, so I'm not really sure, like even in the temples, I used to be Hindu, so we never used to cover our head over there. We just go like this.
Yeah, no, it's
So-
obviously something very new to you, of course. No, it's I mean, like, just growing up, none of the women in my family covered their hair. None of them, because I think after in India, Pakistan specifically, I think this maybe happened in the Muslim Arab world too. But after it's weird, during the British times, they all covered full niqab, everything, like my grandma, all of them used to do that when they were young kids in India. But after the British left, for some reason, everyone took their hijab off. Yeah, they all took their hijabs off. And then now, like, my sister started wearing it. Then my mom started wearing it. So it sort of had this, a lot of in the Western world, I think what happened, Tariq Ramadan, I don't know if you've heard of him, he's a European Muslim scholar, but he talks about this effect that happened in the Western world, that the people that came to the West, he specifically talks about the Algerians in France, the Pakistanis in Britain, the Turks in Germany. He's talking about them, but it's similar to the ones in America, that when they would come here, they realized that they were from Algeria coming into France, for example, right? But what were their kids? Right now, their kids are growing up. Their French or English is better than their Arabic or Urdu, whatever it is, and they had an identity crisis. They didn't know what they were. So their parents were like, "You're Algerian or you're Pakistani," but they're like, "No, we're not. Like, I've never seen that place." And so what he says, what happened is, this split happened. Half of them tried to assimilate completely into the land they were in. Like, you ask them, "Where are you from?" "Oh, American, I'm Houstonian." Like, they don't even like even mentioning where they're from, right? The other half became like, it wasn't a good thing, he said, because they almost became hateful against the culture and tried to become anti whatever they were, like anti-American, this and that. But he said slowly what started happening was that these young people started developing their own identities and stuff. So like for us, and it became a big thing, the beard, the hijab, it became associated with an identity. We're not from this land, we're not from back home, we're our own thing, we're Muslims.
Also an observation on tradition.
Wow.
I went to a couple of Sufi Atars, and a lot of them are from Pakistan. And, I know we're not supposed to wear see-through stuff. A lot of the clothing, it's so beautiful, but it's all like, see-through, the hijabs are see-through, like,
You're not supposed to, I mean,
Especially in the masjid.
And we hear that like sometimes the duppattas are like net or something? Is it okay?
Can't see the hair. I
If
mean,
you can put something
Oh,
underneath
okay,
it,
you can see the hair.
it would be allowed, right, if you put like a covering like I have underneath and then you put a.
Yeah,
screen
yeah,
on, that
of
is
course.
actually right there. You can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the
You have to go
thing.
shopping, yeah. You get it out. Show you.
I'm gonna find that.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
let's go to the next slide. Let's get into the final thing.
I talked to my wife too, she has. I got 4 girls, so.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's my daughter's the most concerning to me right now. She's 6 and I'm already freaking out about everything about my daughter. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. Yeah, even my wife's family, like there was no, I mean, she started wearing hijab in university. You know, she never had a concept of covering her hair, you know, other than dupattas, like or for prayer. But I think in the Muslim world, generally what happened is after colonialism, it just sort of, the hijab came off. You know, what's interesting about the Muslim world, I mean, I saw this in Morocco, is very striking. The old city is like, it's almost very ugly. Like if you're walking through the alleyways, I mean, there's such little room to walk. And you're looking at this and you're like, man, how can people live here? What you slowly start realizing is everything's on the inside. You're not seeing past these gates. Like the masjid I loved was the Harawiyin. I have this dhikr from there that I audio taped. I listen to it like almost every day. It's so beautiful. They just were reciting Quran. But this very particular way they recite the Quran, and you just get into a trance almost because it's so beautiful. But I couldn't even find the door of this place because I was using Google Maps, which do not do that in Morocco. Get a guide. I was like, I know French. I can do it all myself. Like, but I was stumbling my way through the old city trying to find this stuff, getting lost 100 different ways. But this gate opens up and this massive courtyard, it's a golden gate and it's just this beautiful building. And that's how they have these thing called riyads, I think, right? And you have these little doors, you go in, you open them up and this massive courtyard will open up. And so that's what I started realizing. See, the Muslim world was more like, because women have to cover so much, it's almost like give them everything on the inside, you know? So the moment they enter their houses, the hijab comes off, you know, they're in front of their mahrams, which we'll talk about in a second. And, you know, everything's on the inside. There's on the outside is just sort of like this, you don't know what's on the inside of the houses. It just looks like this dreary little hallway, right? I mean, imagine going to like a mansion and only seeing the hallways and not getting to see any of the closed doors of the rooms. I mean, that's where the whole house is inside the rooms. So I think the Muslim cities, that's what I kind of realized with the Medina, the old cities, everything's on the inside of these doors. You don't really know what's going on until you actually are invited inside or go to one of these places. Because it's a difficult thing. I mean, hijabs, I mean, I've never worn it. It's a difficult thing. It's not easy. Family, I have the middle way. The middle way I put here because Rasul Sallam described the Muslims as ummatan wasata. Wasat means like a middle. So it's the way of the middle. And this hadith I thought was interesting is the Prophet Muhammad SAW was once informed of 3 men who sought to improve their worship by resolving to pray throughout the night without sleeping, to fast the entire year without breaking the fast, and to forego marriage and sexual relations, right? Now, stopping there, that is considered in most religions. There are people that do that, right? Like, and like I had a friend who was a Hindu priest. He was Swami Narayan, right? So this was part of it, that he would never be able to marry, right? Or like the Catholics, right? And maybe for different reasons, but there is this concept in certain religions that the higher you get, you break off all ties with the world, right? You become holy, like that's beneath you, these worldly pleasures. Now look what the Rasul says. He said, he went to them and advised them against this approach, saying, by God, I am more observant of God than you and more conscious of him than you. So what he's saying there, he's like, I'm a prophet of Allah. Like I am he recognized what he is. He's the best of all of them. And he said, yet I fast and I break my fast. I sleep and I pray. And I also marry women. He who does not follow my sunnah is not one of my followers. So this is the thing about the Muslims. You'll see the most holiest of the people, whether they're men or women, they're married, they have children. So they're partaking in society. Now, I remember when I was in Montreal, I may have mentioned the story, but I was walking through downtown once and there were these like white French people wearing the Indian yogi things. So they were converts to Hinduism. I had a very long conversation with him. And then that's what I was trying to explain about religion. He's trying to explain that they don't get married, they're giving up the world. And I was like, no, it's like, you need to be balanced, right? This is our approach. So I was trying to convince him to read the Quran. I was like, look at our approach, because we're trying to partake in things, right? If the Prophet ﷺ had never married, had done things, you can't really follow his example. But no, he is showing you how to be married, right? He is showing you how to deal with like women, if you're a man, his wives are dealing with him. He has children. He has his daughters, he's raising them, he's talking to them. You see how he's doing these things. So when we enter this idea of the family, it is very much an Islamic thing to get married and to have children, like if you can, right? This is not fard, that's not an obligation, but it is something from the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so the book says, God does not require us to renounce the world or the good things in life to attain piety. Prophets marry and have children. And again, all the imams and scholars throughout history, like who were able to, they were married and had children. And one thing I wanted to mention, the Prophet ﷺ's time. The Prophet himself ﷺ divided his time into 3 parts so that each area of his life would be given its proper right. 1 part for devotional worship. So think about that. Think about how we arrange our life and how the Prophet ﷺ did his. 1/3 of it was for worship, like time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? 1 part was for his family. So 1 entire part is just for his family, his wives, his children, perhaps cousins, and 1 part to listen to people and fulfill their needs. So 1 part for everything else, right? I think a lot of us, that everything else becomes like 90%, right? And everything else is sort of squeezed in sometimes. But that's the way that he was doing, that he split his time up. This is from Manila, Philippines, this image. A family poses for a picture in Lunita Park. Let's go to the next one. Let's talk about marriage. And so the Quran in Surah Rum, and of his signs is that he created for you spouses from yourselves that you might find rest in them. And he placed between you love and compassion. And these are signs for people who reflect. And for marriage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he also describes men and women as garments for each other, libas. And so scholars have looked at that concept of libas in various different ways. Clothes are a protection from external forces, right? So spouses are seen as a protection from external forces. There are things that might affect you. And it was not just talking about physically, right? Oftentimes it breaks down into, I need to protect my wife and kids, physically. But for men, a lot of times, like when the Prophet ﷺ, again, when he was given the first revelation, who did he go back to? Who's the first person he sought out? Was his wife. She's the one that acted like his libas, right? She was his protection. You're a good man. Khadija radiallahu anha, she was the one that was saying that, calming him down, telling him, let's go to Waraq, let's go to my cousin, So these are the kind of things that marriage is supposed to really provide. Now, generally, there's a whole, I think, we could talk a lot about just family, beyond just the immediate family ties, maintaining relationships with the kin. So it's a duty the Prophet ﷺ spoke strongly against, those who sever family ties. It's very, very sinful. You have stories of people, brothers or sisters not talking to each other for years, when they get older. It's a very serious thing that the Prophet ﷺ was very against. Especially relevant for converts is you may have family members who are not Muslim, right? It's trying to maintain those ties. What you said was interesting at the break is a lot of Muslims convert and, people think like they've gone crazy. It's kind of interesting, like, oh, this person's gone insane because they're doing things that they've never done before. So they're dealing with that. And so one of the examples that maybe I had mentioned was there was a British convert, as a young man, maybe in his 30s. And he said that when he became Muslim, everything just went crazy. Like his parents kicked him out. They were really, really bad to him. And so he was at this masjid giving this lecture, and he looked like a typical British kid. And he just said, yeah, now my mom drives me to Jummah prayer. You know? So it takes time, right? Maybe it takes time. And I think the fact that the manners, the etiquettes change for the better, the respect for the parents increases, that should really be something that brings the families closer, right?
With my mom, she's so against Muslims. She tells me bad stuff about Muslim and I always correct her. I don't tell her I am converted, but I correct her because she grew up in that way in India. It's just so bad, like she always, oh, you see Muslims are like that. I said, Mama, how many times you have seen Hindu people doing good? Show me one. I said, I lived all my life. Tell me, give me one example. You tell me, oh, Muslim does this is culture, this is. I said, okay, tell me what you have seen. Show me one people in our families who are good. I mean, I don't say her because I'm converted, but I correct her. So she now say anything in front of me, think twice before she say anything to me now. Because I correct her real quick. I just stop her and it's not like I'm arguing with her. I just tell her, give me the example. Otherwise, I said, it's people. I said, it's not about culture. It's not about religion. It's people, those who are good or bad. You can't just say, just because Muslim is, you know. So I have to really, because she was so against, like, I was raised in very, totally against Muslims. I was. So
Yeah, no,
it's just
especially
very
that
hard.
land is very polarized and it's becoming even more polarizing now. So I mean, it's that's difficult. And so that's why it's more difficult, you know. I mean, it's one thing to, you know, Muslims have to respect their parents, right? I mean, that's a thing on its own. But if your parents are like talking against Islam or talking about, you know, it takes even a stronger heart and, you know, just to,
I have to be very respectful.
Yeah,
The way I
yeah.
talk to her, but I have to still stop her because I don't agree. I mean, I
yeah,
don't know what to do. But
no, it's a very difficult thing.
I've spoken with reverts, I speak to a lot of people. You know, and I've spoken with them where they have a real difficulty with this because some of them have experienced emotional, sexual, physical abuse within their own family. And they try to reconcile that. And, you know, you can't tell somebody that's experienced those things at the hands of someone in their family that, you know, just forgive and forget. That's impossible. When they laid hands on them and abused them in that way. So how do you reconcile that to the great, you know, it's the great sin to sever that tie? At some point, you have to sever that tie just for your own sanity.
Yeah, no, we're not, again, these are general statements, right? I mean, they're general rulings about how to behave. So we're talking about, and I'm talking about born Muslims who don't talk to their brothers for years over something like, you know, you didn't give me my due in inheritance, or, you know, some business deal fell apart. I mean, there'd be serious things to that person. We're talking about that. But this thing, now we're talking about something like, I was abused for years by my father, or I was abused for years by an uncle or something. And now, then it becomes different. Then someone's telling you, oh, keep ties with them. It's like, that may not be the best course of action, and it may be detrimental. The number one thing in that situation would be is you need your own sanity. Number one, you need to be your good yourself. I mean, if that person is causing you not to be normal, then it may be better to sever ties with them completely, right?
That's what I tell them. I tell them, look, that guidance is for minor infractions. You know, it's for if you had gotten a fist fight over or something with your brother. You could have. But if there's abuse at its core, and it's a toxicity in your life that prevents you from attaining your deen and Allah, then it's better to cast them aside, even if they are your family, and focus on your relationship with Allah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this would be, again, it'd be something maybe like, I don't know if there's a psychologist or someone that actually knows how this stuff works to actually tell them, look, my religion has this general guidance, right? I have to be good to my family, I have to keep ties with them. But now you're talking about something that if it were public, this person would go to prison for years, right? Or possibly. They did this to me. You know, what's the best thing for my own sanity, for my own health, for all these things, right? I think that's a different analysis altogether. And it you know, in those situations, it could be better. Now, you know, like I'm thinking, I don't know what came into my mind, the story of Hadith Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he's one of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the father of Hadith Aisha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, Abu Bakr's own family member was the one that started that rumor about her, that she had, you know, committed adultery or something. Now, he was giving that guy money. He was giving that person money. He was giving him like an allowance every month. And this person starts a rumor, though, the most heinous, vicious rumor about his daughter. Right? Now, he said, I'm going to stop giving money. That's the least I can do, right? I mean, this guy is creepy dude starting rumors about my daughter, who's the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, there's an ayah that came down, a verse came down from Allah that said that those who do good, let them continue doing good. Meaning, like, you're already doing something good for this guy. Keep it up, because that's for you. It's not for him. So in that situation, that's what I'm saying. The number one thing is the person's own sanity. Like if they can't be healthy and good and normal and mentally sound, trying to keep ties with this person, then they shouldn't. But if they could, and like, you know, maybe they give an allowance or something if the person needs it, Allahu alam. It's a very particular situation. That is general advice, but something like that is, again, you're talking about something that maybe like would have caused a person to go to jail, like years of abuse or something, you know?
I mean, it's come to me before because I talk to these people and, you know, as new converts and they hear this and she several times in the good way, it's always about, you know, making a good relationship with your family.
Yeah,
They
this
say-
it's not
they say,
talking.
I don't know what to do, you know, because I can't. And this, my advice, and I'll talk to the imam and sometimes we talk to them together and it's always the same, saying, Allah is first and your deen is first. And if having a relationship with that person is interfering with that deen because of this past behaviors of them, it's everything.
Yeah, and this brings up the other point about a lot of the Muslim rulings, a lot of the Muslim laws, right? They're there. Oftentimes what you get into then is like this idea of the lesser of two evils type of things, right? Like you're not dealing with what is optimal. You're dealing with what's the least harmful thing that I need to do, right? And it goes back to maybe the example we gave about the food. If you're on some island where there's no fish, there's only these wild boars or something, and you have to eat them, otherwise you won't, you know, you might starve. They become lawful to you, right? Because the circumstances have changed, right? In this situation, I kind of see it a bit the same. We're not talking about that one aunt who constantly backbites about everybody, right? We're talking about something different. We're talking about some very serious situation. And most, again, you have to understand. Now, this is maybe it's a bit naive of me. I don't know, but my imagination is that most of the Muslims that are saying this in the masjid have never seen the type of things you're talking about. Even, I mean, like sexual abuse or even physical abuse from a man to a woman. I've never even heard of it in my extended family.
A woman to man.
I've never even heard of that. Like, that's not even something like, if it happens, like it's so well hidden. Like, I've never even heard of anything like that, right? Like in my family. So like a lot of times it's just like, this happens? Like, really? Like, is that possible? And my friends who are converts, everyone, or even non-Muslims who I've become very close with, a lot of them have these stories. You know, one person was telling me that her mom's crazy. She said, "Oh, she's nuts." And I was like, "You shouldn't say that about your mom. You know, like you should have a bit more respect for your mother." And she's like, "No, she's crazy, man. She was abused by her uncle like sexually for years." And I was like, "Oh God, you know, like that's a different." You know, it's like it's not something you think about, but those sorts of situations, like I think a lot of maybe the born Muslims don't have the capacity to understand a lot of that stuff because they're not coming from those places.
I mean, and I hear some of those things because, you know, in my conversations and I hear about some of their feelings about their relationships with their family members. I try to discern what it is it that their mother is upset with them, or is it something much more deeper than that? And so, and whenever it's just their mother's upset with them because, you know, she may not even be a Christian, but she doesn't want them to be a Muslim.
Yeah.
I'll say, or whatever the religion is, you know, say, well, look, you have to respect your mother. That's, you cannot disrespect your mother, but so be polite with her and all of those things, so do not shout, do not. raise your
Exactly.
voice. You
Yeah.
must be polite to your mother.
Yeah, like it doesn't, there's no enforcement of you must spend this much time with them, you must visit them like this. But if you are there with them, there's a way that you could just rail against them and curse at them, or, you know, act disrespectful or make snide comments. Or there's, you know, just, I'm just not gonna say anything, you know, or I'm just gonna try to control myself as much as possible, you know. That's probably what it becomes. And realistically, that's where Islam is. It's in, you know, the word hikmah, you know, the word hikmah means
Is it wisdom?
wisdom,
Wisdom.
right? And so in Surah Luqman, I think it's this chapter 31 of the Quran, God really talks about wisdom, hikmah. And it gives this man Luqman, who's talking to his son, talking about wisdom. Wisdom is, this word hikmah is beyond ilm. Ilm is knowledge. So what I'm doing right now, we're teaching, we're just talking about knowledge, right? We're giving you knowledge, and it's stuff you may already know. Hikmah goes beyond that. It's knowing what to do in the particular circumstance. What's the best way to do it? And so when you're now weighing all these different things, you know the laws up here, you know the rulings, and now you're looking at this person's situation, you're reading their face, you're reading how troubled they are, you're reading their intention, and then you're providing something. That's wisdom. That's what the prophets have, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam, if you look at all the stuff that Abraham does, it's just so much wisdom coming out, you know, like the stuff that he's doing, the things that he's talking about, the way that he's saying things, the way that he's trying to convince people. It's not just, this is what God's saying and here it is. It's like he's using his faculties to really think about the people around him, how to talk to them, how to see them, how to make his point, that sort of thing. So I think these day-to-day interactions are, it's everything, you know, that's where our religion really is. It's trying to deal with situations that we've never dealt with before. There's no clear-cut answer, right? And I think most people are trying to look for clear-cut answers. What do I do in this situation? What do I do in this situation? And they want somebody like a scholar or a prophet to just tell them, what do I do here? What do I do? But it's not that easy, right? You get messy situations, you get things you've never seen. And that's the whole point of fiqh, is the scholars are sitting around trying to understand, like, okay, well, we have the situation here now. It's totally different. So that's really beautiful that you're looking at this and trying to give them answers and trying to see their situations. Because it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. It's literally just, there are guidelines, there's guideposts, and then there's principles of mercy, of kindness, of wisdom, of justice, right? You're asking this person now to do something, maybe it's unjust, because they've been hurt so bad so many years, right?
I came across, like my mom, you know, it's Easter weekend. I grew up in a very Catholic family, so it's a big deal. And we actually had a beautiful conversation. She was like, so I guess you're not gonna be able to come over for Easter because you're Muslim now. And, you know, and I told her, so we actually revere Jesus, peace and blessings be upon him, very much in Islam as well. It's just that for us, he's a prophet, not the son of God. He is not divine. We do not pray to him. You know, so I explained it to her, and actually she was really receptive, and I compared the stories, and you know, she was actually really receptive and almost like some Christians will agree, actually, yeah, like maybe it's not right really to be praying to him. You know, he is not like, you know, so well, actually, she actually was almost moving that way with me, like, you know, you're so used to saying Jesus, like I didn't have the name Christy, that's why I changed it to Jenna in my Islamic, you know, but it's like, you know, she was at least, she felt connected to me, that okay, we're not that different in our beliefs, you know, we revere Jesus, it's just that he's like, you know, the prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was also a prophet, but he was the last prophet, so, you know, he is in our prayers, but we still revere Jesus and other prophets that came from, just like in the Bible. I kind of connected instead of separate. Which is
Yeah.
actually really, I think a good thing with any religion, if you have any knowledge, like in Hindus, yeah, you guys do this, well, we do this, we believe this, you know, if you connect, I think people are more open to, you know, learning more about the religion that you're practicing. It's just my experience.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because I think most humans can, again, maybe not atheism, but most humans can connect to a powerful deity, right? A single God that's up there. At least at that basic level, most people can come together and say, like, we believe that. Now, there's differences and all that stuff, but you can come together under, like, in you know, like, I mean, my family used to watch these like old like Bollywood Indian movies, right? But oftentimes they say like Upparwala, right? Like they have this thing like the one above. That's what it means. I mean, even that is something that we can connect on. Like Allah is that Lord at the, I mean, obviously when you're talking about people of the book, like Christian, there's so many similarities, right? And they are things to come together on. They're not things to get separated on. I mean, especially with, I've always felt with like Hindu converts, it's easier for them to become Muslim in some ways because we have the same language, we have the same food, we're all like the same. And so it's easier for them to sometimes come into the culture because the culture is the same. There's a Muslim culture that's already there that exists that's very similar. You know, so, but, you know, my friends in engineering and UH, we're all Hindus. We share the same culture, we talk about the same language. So often it's, we talk about, you know, gods, and that's where I learned these guys were Swaminarayan. It's a particular Hindu, I guess, sect in Gujarat, but they were saying, yeah, we believe in one God. You know, it just, he manifests himself in different ways, and you can come to some similarities and say like, yeah, that's, you know, we don't believe that, but it's a similar concept. But we share the same food, we share the same this and that, and so any sort of commonalities, I think it's good. And these things, especially here with like Easter and Christmas, they'll come up. You were mentioning the story about Easter, but like I had a friend who was, his family invited him for Christmas, and he goes and he takes his kids and he just says like, you know, we're just here for family. So out of respect for his parents. But I think one of his parents like cooked all this pork on purpose. And so he was like so mad. He's like, you know, I don't eat pork. And like, really, you don't eat pork? Like, and it was almost like these games were being played. And like, I think at that point is when all this advice comes, like, where you need to be good to them. Like, maybe you're like this wasn't cool, but, you know, like, now you're making it difficult for us, or, you know, like, I think someone else had alcohol, and like, or some family just take away all the alcohol. We're not gonna have alcohol if you come over. And so then it's like, again, it goes back to the wisdom of like, do you go telling, you know, I'm not celebrating the divinity of Christ, you know, I'm trying to be with my family and trying to make some connection with them, you know. This picture it's a Malaysian couple, but they're wearing traditional Chinese wedding outfits. This is kind of interesting, this picture, because these outfits, you'll see them in older manuscripts and stuff. Like a lot of the Central Asians used to wear these types of things. And that's another thing in India, Pakistan. Like I think even the wedding dresses are the same. So like the women wear like that red, you know, and then the men have these like turban, the Aladdin shoes and all that stuff. So it's the same kind of thing. It's a very cultural thing. Let's go to the next one. I think this is the last major slide. We talked about marriage. Just I wanted to mention some of the things the book mentions, or discusses the obligations. So we're talking about the legal requirements. Marriage is about love and mercy and kindness. That's a whole different thing we're not talking about. So marriage should function on those things. Then there are obligations where things are breaking down, or, you know, or these are things at a boundary foundational level that exists. So legally, the male, like the husband, is obligated to provide financially for his family, for the wife and the children. And what that means is, and I remember reading this in the fiqh books, it said for a man, if he wants to marry, he has to be able to provide food on a daily basis. He has to be able to provide clothes for a year and some sort of shelter for a woman if he wants to get married. And the book said, this is a Shafi book, it said, and if you cannot do that, fast. Thought that was kind of interesting. And I wasn't married at this time and I was like, oh, okay. So women are not obligated to work. That does not mean that they cannot work. Okay, they are not obligated to work, meaning someone in the Islamic civilization like is always has to provide for a woman. Whether it's your father, whether it's your husband, whether it's your son, whether it's a nephew, whether it's an uncle, someone is legally obligated to provide for you. You don't have to, but like there are aunts I have in Florida. So they're from my paternal side. My brother and I are legally obligated to provide for them if they cannot, if my father or his brother can't. So it's very important to understand that Islamically, like this idea of like these older women living alone and don't have any, like, that's just wouldn't really happen in the Muslim world. I mean, at worst, a qadi would come in and require a man, like, you have to pay for her subsistence, you know. That's just how it works.
Case of condoms, what if the auntie is, not good?
It's a very good question. I don't have the answer for that. I don't know. Yeah, it does. Because this was happening in India a lot. You'd have cousins and this and that who are still Hindus. Actually, most of the Mughal kings were married to like Hindu Rajput women, so all their half families were all Hindus. That's a really good question. I'm gonna have to ask that. So if you have non-Muslim relatives and you would be legally obligated to pay for them, are you obligated to pay for them if they're non-Muslims? I don't know. I'll have to find that out.
Have Germani aunties that sister.
Yeah, you know, that would,
And their children refused for whatever reason to accommodate them.
yeah, that could fall on you.
I'm the only brother.
Yeah, that would legally be on you unless they had children, you know, sons and that sort of thing. But it's good to think about that. Just if someone's destitute and if it is your responsibility, if no one else is taking that up, it might fall on you. So it's a good question. I'll have to find out. Sorry, go ahead.
So for example, my mom, her husband passed away, so my dad passed away, and then I'm the only child, but I'm a daughter. Is my husband supposed to provide for my mom or her brothers?
I think it would be her family,
Oh,
not your husband. So it would be her family. So like, for example, like my relatives on my mom's side, it's considered a different family technically.
right.
So the word in Arabic is qawm. Qawm is like your people. I think Sheikh Hamza was mentioning this. That's very interesting that all of the prophets call their people Ya Qawmi, oh my people, except for Isa alayhi salam. Jesus never says Qawmi, he says Ya Bani Israel, O children of Israel. Why is that? He has no father. He's not paternally linked to them. So he says Ya Bani Israel, because he's technically, so it's a paternal link. So that's what you have to, yeah. So like my aunts on my mom's side, I'm technically not responsible for them. Now, again, we're talking about obligations, right? If you see someone that's your aunt, that's, you know, no one's paying for them and it's not, you can obviously do it. We're talking about obligations. So on my father's side is what matters, because the view is that they have somebody on that other side, right? On their side. So like my aunt on that side, she has her own sons and she has her own husband's family that has to take care of her then at that point. Marriage generally, you know, marry for religion is the, you know, there's a hadith about different reasons that people marry for. Obviously, you're supposed to marry someone you're attracted to, you like, all that stuff. But among that, once you've decided that you like someone, then it's marry for religion, marry someone that's pious, marry someone that's good. And I should mention, obviously, that divorce has always been permissible. it's something that's very hated. I think there's a hadith that says that the shaitan, the thing he loves most is to get people divorced. So it's a very heinous thing, but of course it's possible and it's permissible and it does happen now more than ever, I guess.
Related to when a person dies and you give money, what do you call that?
Inheritance.
Inheritance. Is if your mother's side passed away, your husband don't get any inheritance, right?
Your husband doesn't get an inheritance from like a woman's
you're
money?
saying her mother side, if her mother passed away, her husband is not getting any inheritance.
Oh, yeah, because that wouldn't go likewise. And inheritance rules are kind of interesting as well. We're not going to discuss them here.
Where I'm getting is that usually the guys has more because of that responsibility of taking care of the woman in the family.
Yeah, I mean, the responsibilities on the male, mostly Islamically. I mean, I think traditionally it was the case, but Islam, I shouldn't say dumps it on men, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala levels it on men. It's very much on them. I mean, it's just the way the society worked. It was seen as you have to provide for your family. I mean, it's so much the case that a woman technically can give her husband zakat, right? A man can never give his wife zakat because that money is owed to her. Like he has to provide for her. But a woman's money, she could be a millionaire and be living with a man who has no money. You know, she might be helping him out, but that money is never hers. So like my wife, if she ever makes money or she's getting money from like her dad, it's a separate bank account, you know, don't mix it. Like my money is her money, like she's on jointly with my stuff. But if she gets money, men have to be very careful not to start absorbing that money and taking it for their own. If she agrees with it, that's one thing. If she's okay with it, that's one thing. But, you know, I mean, justice-wise, I think, especially in the Shafi schools, a little bit strict on this on men. Women don't have to provide food. They don't have to cook for you. They don't have to do any of that stuff. The bargain for exchange, like the contract works like I'm getting to enjoy you physically. I have to provide everything for you. I have to provide maids. I have to provide this. I have to provide that. But that's what a man gets, that other part of it. Okay, that's kind of what the Shafis came down on. They were like, okay, this is what the exchange is. Other schools may say more, well, no, she should take care of him a little bit, this and that. But generally, that's not the case. Men are obligated to do all this stuff. And yeah, I mean, any questions on that? Let's get into the, yeah, there's nothing online. The relationships, mahram and non-mahram, right? Male-female relationships. It becomes a big thing here because this society is not a segregated society, right? There is segregation between men and women generally. The general rule that I grew up was if you don't have business with a woman, or like, for example, like in class, you have to do a project or something. If you're not have some business, there's no real interaction with a non-mahram woman between a male and a female. All right. It's considered very strict here. So someone of the opposite gender whom a person cannot marry is called a mahram. So mahram, we'll talk about who the categories are, but the easiest example is like my mother, my sister, my daughter. Those are my mahrams. That means they also don't have to cover their hair and that sort of thing in front of me, right? Non-mahrams, you must observe stricter boundaries of modesty and you have to have appropriate behavior. Non-mahram is any person whom one can marry, even if there is no desire to marry that person, such as a cousin, a brother-in-law, and a sister-in-law. The cousin thing, I think, is sometimes different. I know my Hindu friends, their cousins were like their sisters. You know, there's no marriage between cousins, none of that. And so that was a bit different, what I saw. So intimate relationships outside of marriage, such as dating, physical touching, or being alone with somebody of the opposite gender is entirely impermissible. And we'll get to the mahrams in a second. I just wanted to mention familial rights, like honor your mother, your father, your children. We talked about this a little bit, but there's a hadith that the parent is the middle gate of Jannah, that they're the middle gate of Jannah. So there's this concept, my grandma used to tell me this, that in the Arab world, if you have an elderly parent alive, they like are super happy because they're like, oh, I'm getting to Jannah now. I just have to take care of my father, my mother, and inshallah I'll be in Jannah. You know, so it was that much. It's seen as it's just a very high thing. So especially in the old age, it's a very important thing. And then the mother specifically, this is in Surah Luqman, that same surah we were talking about, the word of wisdom. So Luqman says to his son, he's talking, giving him advice, saying, you know, you should respect your parents. But he says, and Allah Ta'ala says, and we have entrusted man with the care of his parents. His mother bore him in weakness upon weakness, and his weaning was in 2 years. So give thanks to me and to your parents. To me is the return. What scholars say is what's interesting about this is God is saying, give thanks to me and give thanks to your parents. He's putting the parents on the same level as him in terms of thankfulness. And he specifically talks about mothers, like fathers aren't mentioned here. What's interesting, the whole conversation is coming up with a father talking to his son, right? But the mother's mentioned here, and what scholars, I was reading the tafsir of this verse, it says the scholars talk about 3 things that the mother does before the father's ever in the picture almost. She carries the child in difficulty, she bears the child in difficulty, and then she feeds the child for 2 years in difficulty. And the man's not really like, he's just there providing, but it's after 2 years, maybe the child starts to recognize his father. And then what the father becomes important, tarbiyah, teaching the children, giving them wisdom, giving them knowledge. And we all know the famous hadith where the man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, who is entitled to the most good treatment of anyone? And the Prophet said, your mother. And he said, then who? And he said, your mother. He said, then who? He said, your mother. He said, then who? He said, your father. So the mother is a very, very, very high up in the Muslim world. And this picture is actually, do you guys remember where this is from?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Morocco. Yeah, Hakeem and his mother, right?
Yeah, this is Morocco's Soufiane Boufal dances with his mother as they celebrate on the pitch after stunning the World Cup quarterfinal victory against Portugal. So when they beat Portugal, I mean, people, you don't see this really in the West, right? It's just not something that like, he literally brought his mother and started like dancing with her and was happy. It's a very interesting thing. I thought, so it's a huge respect for mother, you know, like it's a very big deal in the Muslim world. And then the children, you know, love and kindness, tarbiyah, also justice, you know. I think what you were talking about earlier, you know, the first duty is to the child. It's not the child's respect to the parent. It's the parents taking care of the child. And if you abuse that trust, God knows the punishment for that, because you take an innocent child and you abuse it and you're bad to it and you're unjust to it. I think that's the number one thing. And there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, there's a man that saw Rasul kiss his grandson. And he said, like, this man said, I have 10 children, I've never kissed any of them. And the Prophet ﷺ responded with something like, you know, someone who doesn't have mercy, like how, you know, what can you show them? Like, what mercy can we give to you if you don't have mercy to your children? So the Prophet was very, very caring of children, and especially his own grandchildren. Let's go to the next slide. This will be the last one. Just to have this, we're going to email the PDF of the slides later, but these are mahrams. And yeah, I guess the only one that's not based on blood is the last 2 on the mahram side, wife of the father, wife of the son, right? Those like my wife is mahram with my father, so she can take her hijab off in front of my father. That's the only relationship that's not based on blood. Otherwise, it's all based on blood. Usually, like, I think I was trying to tell my son this, but if you encompass someone's genetics like completely, like you have blood from both of them, they're your mahram. Like my aunt, her full I encompass with my half, you know, so she's a mahram. Again, how it works exactly, but the non-mahram, yeah, and these are mahrams, yeah, for the husband of the mother. So son-in-law, same thing. Any questions on that? Let's go to the next slide. The things I did want to say, I wasn't really prepared for this being the last class. Like, I didn't know it was coming. I was like, I don't really know what this 80 all is. I was very humble just doing this class. I know we probably made a lot of mistakes just trying to figure out what to do, how to teach, all that kind of stuff. And it's not something really you teach because, it's just, it's more of an honor for me just to be able to sit with all of you and just talk to you. I would say my final things to say would be is, God looks at your hearts, not your outside forms. He really is. There's a connection between you and Allah. Not a single person, not everyone in the world can change that. You have a particular relationship with Allah, which you do. That is stronger, that's more binding than anyone can affect. No one on earth can mess with that. So when you're at night, when you're in the dark, wherever you are, God is watching over you. It's not, no one can really do anything. The other thing I will say is, Shaitan is real. Iblis is real. He's not happy until you're dead and in the ground, then he'll stop. But until that point, he is never going to let up. Okay, and he hates Adam alayhi salam and he hates his children. He really is aduwwun mubin. He's an avowed enemy of us. And so he will not stop. He will never come around. And this society here is wonderful in many ways. But one of the things that it has is it will give your nafs anything it wants immediately. And your nafs is craving these things. And that's the things that Shaitan has at his arsenal, I would say, is all the enjoyment is in this society. And Islam is difficult. It's difficult. God's not trying to make it difficult, but this is a test. And so with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hadith that I always think about is ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir. That this dunya, this life, is a prison for the believer and a paradise for the disbeliever. And what that means is that one of the meanings is it's difficult. There are constantly things that you have to think about, right? You're talking about covering your hair. You don't have to do that if you're not Muslim. It's just easy, right? You have to eat certain types of food. You can't engage maybe in certain types of transactions. It's difficulties, especially here you will find issues. And so I have seen Muslims, born Muslims, and I've seen Muslims who converted. Sometimes they go back, right? Because they're craving, their nafs is craving, and it's difficult oftentimes. So just remember the rewards, inshallah, are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And things may be difficult, you may have issues, but I think the fact that you have each other even as a community, I don't know what I know this is the final class, but I don't want this to end as far as you all being friends and meeting up with each other, talking to each other. That's very important because the wolf gets the lone sheep, right? That's kind of the saying we have. So stick to stick with the Jamaat, stick with the communities. Ramadan, especially Eid al-Fitr, is often the loneliest time for converts. That's what I've heard. Because we go to our families, right? And converts often don't have people. So one of the things that the brothers can do here is maybe we have something for Eid that we can offer, but this is something that we need to do is we need to keep as a community, all right? You're not part of our community. We're all part of the same thing. And so we don't want Ramadan or Eid or any of these times to be lonely times. We need to stick together and stuff. But like I said, it was a pleasure for me. Any questions, any issues, I know we went over time.
Basically, asking a little bit later on, if you can please refresh us again about the objective of our life. Is that you would like to bring Jannah to Firdaus.
Inshallah.
So just refresh us. Remember that in our daily life, that is our objective goal. So therefore, it will be how can we make this our reminder someday in our daily life. That's one thing. And then the second one is I'm really happy and kind of a little bit sad and happy again. Happy is because we have this class, and sad is this is about the last class for our first batch. But become happy again because I know that we're going to continue our new class, the second session.